Hello and welcome again to another edition of the Osteopathic Lyceum podcast. I am going to look at an article from, I think it's the Osteopathic Physician from February of 1908. It is from Carl McConnell, or Carl P. McConnell, who is a relatively well-known early osteopathic practitioner or doctor of osteopathy. He wrote a decent amount of books. I mean, not a decent amount of books. I think he wrote 2 books. There was his own and then one with Teal. So it was McConnell and Teal. But anyways, I want to read this article primarily because it's going to show that early practitioners, at least one early practitioner that wrote stuff down, was well aware of the scientific method, whether it was explicit or not. Okay, so again, this is from February of 1908. The Osteopathic Physician, February 1908, Volume 13, Number 2. This is available at the Museum of Osteopathic History's website, or atsu.edu/ I think it's, Anyway, you end up getting like Momiko or something like that. But I want to read this. Like, I could just take a screenshot of this and share it in a variety of ways, but I want to read it because I think it has meaningful value. The article's title is Our Cue for Safety is to Develop Centripetal Forces. I don't know why he necessarily used the term centripetal forces. Maybe there's some cultural cue that I don't have, but it's there. So this is by Carl P. McConnell, MD, DO, from Chicago, or working in Chicago, I think is the most appropriate thing to say at the time. I don't think it means he was from Chicago. I think that's where he was working. So anyways, to read, our friends, a fair percentage of the public, have been very good to us. They have been and still are giving osteopathy wide publicity through both individual and organized support. They have come to us as patients and incidentally referred their friends because they thought our system either cured or benefited them. The press has been liberal toward us. Legislatures have recognized us. So again, this is 1908. A lot of the early recognition was tough. The first school was 1892, or the American School of Osteopathy opened its doors initially in 1892. So 1908, we're not far off. What's that? 16 years? I think my math is okay. 92 to 02 is 10, and then, so 16-ish years. So just saying that there's been some stuff going on where we're having good results. People are saying nice things about us. In modern practice, what I will say is that most people build their practices off of person-to-person referrals more than any other method. It doesn't mean the other methods don't work, such as advertising in a variety of forms, but person-to-person referral seems pretty positive and useful today. To read again, all of this has resulted not simply from our system's positive merits alone. That would be more than phenomenal. Negative forces have been potent factors as well. The uncertainty of medical practice has worked to our advantage. Hence, osteopathic progress has been due to osteopathy's inherent qualities plus the shortcomings of other schools. So that's actually really interesting. He's noting we're doing good stuff, but the other people have problems. Something that I've spoken about quite a bit recently, but in the past as well, is that medical practice, or healthcare practice generally, contains uncertainty. And it's noted here in 1908. And again, McConnell is saying, yeah, we're doing good work, but other people have problems, or the other systems have problems, and that's helping us because our strengths seem to deal with those problems, is the inference, or what may be inferred. Now, the above is an outline of the past decade, but the osteopathic history of tomorrow or the next 10 years will be a different story. Whether that story will be worth telling rests with you and me, the rank and file. Outside of Dr. A.T. Still, all of us are in the common pot. The situation before you and me is simply the old tale, but nevertheless a constantly new one, survival of the fittest. So in 1908, survival of the fittest is probably running around as a common enough statement. It is a misinterpretation of Darwin's initial work because it was survival of the most adaptable. And there's another gentleman whose work on evolution was more popularized than Darwin's at the time, and I think that was the one. I never remember his name, but that was the one that was survival of the fittest. Darwin was survival of the most adaptable. To read again, the happy-go-lucky period of infancy is past. We have arrived at a period of our development where we must scientifically make good, or as a school of the healing art pass into oblivion. The Lord, I am free to say, has been good to us. He has given us a magnificent opportunity, and I am sure the forces that have guided us so far will sustain in the future. if we do our part. So that's italicized. Put some emphasis or some emphasis on that. We have to do our part. It's not simply fate. You actually have to do some work, right, to build something to make it go in a particular direction. Okay. So I'll read again. Times, scientifically and medically, are changing with almost kaleidoscopic swiftness. The medical man is trimming his therapeutic sails most wonderfully, and it requires no prophet to say that we will soon be, as a school, simply a point in the past if we are not up and doing. So one of the things that was happening in the early 1900s is there was, according to McConnell, a lot of change in common medical practice. And he was saying it's admirable, it's positive. They're trimming their sails quite wonderfully. So he was noticing the environment that he was in and how other people were doing good things and saying, hey, we might need to keep up. Not necessarily we might need to. It sounds like he's saying we have to keep up. To read again, this does not mean that Dr. Still will not be considered one of the greatest thinkers and benefactors of the age, or that osteopathy has not done or is not doing much good, but it does mean that osteopathy as a school will be a thing of the past. Do not think for one moment that the dominant school will recognize us. No, never. Just one possible exception, and that is for us to do some really meritorious scientific work. If not, they will absorb our science piece by piece, just as certainly as the sun will rise tomorrow. They are doing it now, and will continue to do so. Our salvation rests within ourselves. There's, just to point to another article that I've included in one of the pieces that I'm looking at with respect to how osteopathic practitioners described their findings and treatment approaches to asthma. There was a report, and it might have even been by McConnell, I'm not sure, but there was a report of medical practitioners using an irritating oil in the region of the vagus nerve, so basically mastoid process, and down along the SCM, especially kind of like SC joint, in order to help. I'm pretty positive it was with asthma. So it was irritation of the vagus, and it seemed to have some positive results from the environment of observation at the time. And the osteopathic practitioners were reporting on this and saying, hey, they're actually looking at the structure-function relationship and doing something about it. So he's noting that stuff is happening, and the osteopathic practitioners at the time, in McConnell's view, maybe were not doing much in the way of positive science or good science. Positive is a judgment, but good's a judgment too. Whatever. Okay. Let me read this again. Yeah, our salvation. Read again. Our salvation rests within ourselves. The public will help us, and gladly, if we will show proper spirit by first helping ourselves. Our colleges are exceedingly busy doing their work. The practitioner is busy with his. But our foundations will be undermined and bodily carried away if we do not protect ourselves. And protection means scientific exploitation. Nothing more or less. And the postgraduate college will do this if you so will it. He's making a general argument in the direction of setting up some postgraduate work, which I would think is fair to say does exist in the osteopathic profession within America. So the DOs, you'll have fellowships, you'll have, like the FAAO, the Fellowship of the American Academy of Osteopathy. So you do more hands-on training, or more hands-on osteopathic training. So there are some fellowships, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they're doing what you would hope they would do, but they at least some would exist now. To read again, the college represents the entire profession, not a part. If it does not or will not interfere with the other schools, it is simply a complement. Our cue is to conserve and develop our centripetal forces and quit the centrifugal balderdash. Think centrifugal. I don't remember. There's a difference between centrifugal and centripetal. One is center seeking and one is center leaving, but I don't remember offhand, and I'm going to screw it up in front of you. So I'm just going to say that they're different. If I remembered properly the difference, actually, you know what? I got a device here. I'll just really quickly do this. Blah 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 blah. Let me get somewhere that's cool. Yeah. Here we go. Centripetal force is a real inward-pointing force. So yeah, going inwards, and centrifugal outward. My understanding is in physics, oh gosh, let me look at it again so I'm not going nuts. Centripetal is inward, centrifugal is outward. Centrifugal is not necessarily considered something that is consistently observable. So let me look at this again. centrifugal balderdash. So yeah, don't race to the middle. He's saying race to the outside is what he's saying. Maybe exploit our differences as opposed to try to be the same is the message there, if I'm interpreting it properly. What the heck? Oh, it's another article. Yeah, I'm reading this wrong. Yeah, so that's the end of what McConnell is saying. There's another article talking about experimental approaches. This is this is interesting because I thought I was reading this in a different way, and really what it is so it's a 3-column deal. Maybe this will show up properly. Okay, it should sort of show up. If I block my face, it tends to show up. So you'll see 3 columns. So it's like a 3-column deal, and the 2 columns are McConnell's article, and the 3rd column is the article from the other person on the same page. So that's kind of what I got to do. So it's the one below that ends up doing what I wanted to talk more about. This is the interesting thing when you're reading old stuff, if you don't necessarily know how the layout was done. I've read a lot of newspapers in my time. I've read a lot of journals in my time. And the manner in which they line them up sometimes doesn't make sense. And this is one of the times it doesn't make sense. So the article that contains the thing that I was considering, or the very specific piece is same thing, February 1908, osteopathic physician. The article is by Clinton E. Acorn, Achorndo of Boston, Massachusetts. The postgraduate movement is worth your attention. I'm not going to necessarily read all of that. It was just talking about subscription fees, and how they could run that. The postgraduate movement, the thing that it's pointing to is the ability to do some sort of research. And I think the reason this lines up this way is because it's on the same page as McConnell's, and McConnell's saying, let's do some science to highlight the things that we're good at, so that we're not consumed by the science that the medical profession is doing. Then we get this about the postgraduate movement. And I'm going to read from here, and it's in the column that I thought belonged to McConnell's article. So I'm going to read here. I feel that it will be sometime before we can or should offer any postgraduate work to the profession in the form of regular courses of study. In the meantime, there is much to do that is both necessary and advisable. The very few $100s we shall have to use at present will not go far, but if we make the effort, we can secure any reasonable amount to investigate and scientifically establish the principles and practice of osteopathic philosophy. So basically the argument here is, hey, we might need to set up a scientific endeavor that is for the profession and not necessarily for the schools at which the profession is being taught. As it stands, I think it's fair to say that the vast majority of osteopathic research is primarily housed within academic institutions, because that's just the way that stuff has gone. Not because it has to be that way, but that's the way that it's gone. The people who have the incentive to do the research have the incentive to do it so that they keep their job and get promotions, whereas everybody else has no incentive to do it. Yeah, so I'm going to read again. Valuable suggestions for future work can be offered by every practitioner who has been actively engaged in practice or school work, and there is much that can be done at once. For examples, number 1, Dr. McConnell and our other investigators should be encouraged to continue with their work. So McConnell was already doing what would be considered scientific work. Number 2, the entire profession should be systematically canvassed for new ideas or valuable data and information. I don't know, I can't say that this is what was meant by this, but this lines up well with my general framework, or the framework that I appreciate, that we want the variability between people, because their variability will provide the ideas that many of us wouldn't have that could be useful to all of us. So you want the outliers, and everybody might be an outlier in a particular way, but for the most part, they're not an outlier. They're sort of in the middle of any pack. But the way in which they're an outlier ends up being useful to everybody else. So that, check everybody, see what their ideas are, and whichever ideas are useful, let's go. Number 3, some practitioners can be found competent and willing to do all the special work necessary to undertake, and others can be found who are willing to raise the money to pay the bills. This lines up with the framework that I often use. It's like, the spirit of the practitioner and the spirit of the administrator. Some people are going to be really good at getting money, and other people are going to be really good at doing the hands-on work as a way to delineate this in different language. 4, let everyone suggest what they would like to have taken up, and then let those interested push their ideas through the postgraduate organization. So they're saying you can have an idea. Let everybody have their idea, and those who are really interested, let's get together and do some work. Right? So self-sorting to a large degree. Right? Then to read again. Investigations that it would be perfectly feasible to take up immediately. So they've got ideas, like we could check these things out. The effect of osteopathic treatment on phagocytic and other protective actions of the human blood. So essentially what they would say is do an osteopathic test the blood before, do an osteopathic treatment, test the blood after, see what the heck the difference is. So if your hypothesis was that osteopathy has a positive effect on phagocytic activity, then you would look at phagocytic activity prior, you would treat, and then look after. And if there was a change, you would see it. If there was no change, you would also see that. So it's a falsifiable hypothesis. B, effective osteopathic treatment on secretions of the stomach and other organs. Test the secretions of the organs before, do the osteopathic treatment, test them after. If there's a change, you can see it. If there's no change, you can see it. Falsifiable hypothesis. Examinations of spines by spinographs or other exact apparatus to establish reliable data on hereditary tendencies. Is your spine similar to that of your parents or your other ancestors that we have access to? What I would simply say is that the answer could be maybe. You might find some signal there, but it could be more about behavior, mimicry, or stage of life, because we know that the vertebral column changes through stage of life. Therefore, maybe what we would find is that people at varying stages of life will have more similarities to one another than they would themselves at a different stage of life. That's a testable hypothesis if you can get enough. D, examination of a great number of spines to establish, if possible, a uniformity of lesions in chronic cases. So the basic suggestion here is, okay, we have the construct of some kind of condition. We have the construct of vertebral column. Let's find a bunch of people let's just find a bunch of people first, check all the vertebral columns and see if there's any similarities. And with respect to the chronic cases, whatever the chronic case would be, is it like chronic consumption? Is it chronic rhinitis? Is it chronic sinusitis? Like whatever it is that's chronic, are there similarities in the patterns between these people? But the thing that makes a difference here is examination of a great number of spines to establish, if possible. It's the if possible, because the person who's writing this, it is Clinton E. Acorn or Achorn. I wish I knew how to pronounce that properly. Can't ask. Not around. And this is 1908, and they were an adult. So but the if possible suggests that they understand that maybe there isn't a uniformity of pattern. E, outdoor treatment of tuberculosis with and without osteopathic treatment. Now, one of the reasons that this is happening in 1908 is because right around here, you see the change. So 1905-ish, you see the change from the term consumption or consumptives. So people with a lung issue that have wasting, to tuberculosis, because I think it was somewhere in the 1890s, maybe the 1880s, where somebody identified the tuberculinum bacteria, and then they started to understand that wasting was chronic tuberculosis of the lung, pulmonary tuberculosis. And what ended up happening is people started to have this interesting success when they put people outside. So they had them in the sunshine, they had them being physically active, and they fed them a lot, right? Because they were wasting, so you wanted to feed them. So there was some interesting stuff happening there. So if that is working, does it work better in the presence or absence of osteopathy? The hypothesis would be that it works better or faster in the presence of osteopathic hands-on treatment. And if it did, you could see it. And if it didn't, you could see it. So that's a reasonable falsifiable hypothesis. To read again, the only real expensive undertaking would be this last, and in this it would be more difficult to secure a competent osteopath to take charge of such a camp than it would be to raise the money. Another thing we should do is to encourage every member of the profession to send books, magazines, papers, personal experience, etc., to some competent person selected by the trustees, such material to be edited and published at the expense of the postgraduate college. This plan of procedure would certainly produce much suggestive and valuable information for the profession and would make all willing to help along the movement. So it would motivate everybody to help the movement. We must not expect to interest the friends of osteopathy if we are not interested ourselves. Let us all get to work right now. Make yourself an active committee of one to see what you can contribute to this movement. Then correspond with the state representative or Dr. Guy E. Luden, Burlington, Vermont. Osteopathy has done much for you. How much will you do for osteopathy? Hey, it's the predecessor to John F. Kennedy. Don't ask what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country. If you are unable to do much now, how much do you think you'll be able to do next year? Do the best you can, and you will never regret it. So the main point here is that there was at least a movement or the beginnings of a movement to do what one would call good basic science. Compare and contrast on kind of bedrock approaches, osteopathic intervention to not osteopathic intervention, see which one helps, see where it helps, test the limits of what it can do. It existed, and I think there may be some drive in the direction of doing the basic research again. However, I think the challenge to that is the fact that it's institutionalized, it's within academic institutions, that you either publish or you perish, or if you don't publish at a certain rate, you don't get promotions, you don't get paid as much. So you might just have a bunch of fluff. But the basic research, I think, remains to be done. It's not that it's never been done. I think most of it remains to be done, and it would be beneficial, because if you like getting aggregated signals and the base level foundational research that's occurred doesn't give you good trustworthy signal, you can't have a good big signal because you have no good small signal. So I think there's still a lot to be done there. It is 2026 as we're talking. What damn day of April is it when I'm recording this? Let me be... why can't I? This is one of the things I dislike about the phones. It's April 6th as I am recording this. So as of April 6th, 2026, I think still some of the high-minded desires in those two articles that I read from February of 1908 in the Osteopathic Physician remain to be fulfilled. I think they can be fulfilled. You just got to do the basic science. We don't need with much vim or vigor people looking for large signal about osteopathy. Part of that is probably just because, say, administrators like the big numbers and percentages, but it's very unlikely that the administrators and policymakers understand the challenges with the larger data sets in a way that is appropriate to healthcare. They just like epidemiological data. Epidemiological data is probably not appropriate for a lot of parts of healthcare. It has value, but if your job as a policymaker means that somebody told you needed big numbers and somebody doesn't have big numbers to give you, then, to play the game as the person who wants to influence the policy, I got to go get big numbers. How do I go get big numbers? And sometimes you can't get money until you have big numbers, but you can't get big numbers until you have money. So there's a bit of a vicious cycle involved. So I would still advocate for the basic science. I understand the game that is afoot, that the policymakers probably want the big numbers, but maybe they don't get the things that they need to get in order to do intelligent policy choice or policy decision making, or intelligent decision making about policy development, because they're so used to large scale data that they don't understand the aggregated value or the disaggregated value of smaller signals. I think it's reasonable to say that some of the stuff you've seen me do recently with respect to things that are contained within the Journal of Osteopathic Medicine, have shown some pilot studies about some really fundamental stuff, and I have hopefully sounded like I think that's a good thing, because I think it's a good thing. So yeah, more fundamental research has the opportunity to be done. I think it's ripe for the picking. So maybe we get to work. If you've listened this far, thank you. Hopefully you've learned something, and we will talk again soon.